Hello and welcome to the Voice Extra podcast. My name's Tayo and today I am joined by voice contributor, theatre lover and writer,
Alex.
How are you doing today, Alex?
Overly hot, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's too much. The humidity is lethal.
Way too much. I need like 4 fans or aircon at least. I'm not designed for this. I've already got burnt.
Oh no.
Yeah, I'm very talented. It's one of my skills. I can burn in anything. It was 20 degrees, 2 hours outside. I had on a shawl and I still ended up pink.
Eesh, that's wow. Okay. I mean, this podcast isn't about like sun and those sun things, but like, ouch, that sounds painful. What this podcast is about is Alex's article on the site called "Social Media: The Teenagers' News Platform." So, building off of the Blackout Tuesday hashtag, it's an article talking about the ways in which not we necessarily, but the way in which teenagers and young people use social media for news and for activism, and asking whether that's actually helpful or whether it is a hindrance.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what inspired you to write this article, Alex?
It was actually, so I've got 2 younger brothers who are twins, which is a bit of a nightmare, but they're 13. And it was the way that they reacted to the news story that really caught my attention, because it was because of the Instagram content that my, 13-year-old brother was for the first time talking about police brutality, George Floyd, systemic racism in the USA, and then also within the UK as well. And I just was amazed because he's never come out with anything, kind of so socially or politically engaged before. So it really made me think about how actually having these social media sites, which are often not used to any great avail, I might say, had become, a news platform.
So do you think social media is an effective news source then? Because your brothers seem to have kind of really internalized stuff from that.
I think it's very effective in so much as it definitely gets the message out there, spreads awareness fantastically. But then in the article, I also discuss that there are downsides of that as well. And a lot of people were complaining about it. So that if you have lots and lots and lots of like hashtag Black Lives Matter, but they're only showing black squares, then actually you're going to hide the hashtag and hide the information from the hashtag. And then there was also the issue that you are turning, what is a really serious issue into like, the new trend. And there were also some complaints that actually you could kind of excuse, I think someone used the phrase excuse white apathy from the past just by, you post a square, oh, it's great now you're anti-racist, but obviously you actually haven't done anything, and it kind of, excuses past behaviour.
Yeah, so do you think people have kind of used it as a way to absolve themselves of previous wrongs?
I think it could be used to do that. But obviously, it's, especially on Instagram, it's a young person's platform. So the hope is that you'd actually kind of get to people before they do anything too drastically wrong.
That makes sense. So it's kind of like giving a better starting point to then push forward more consistently into anti-racism, so you don't end up like decades later being like, oh, my entire life I did X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I think that's why my generational, I don't know, I never know where the generations come in, but, young people nowadays, it's really good that actually this issue has been raised at this point in our lives, because it is most definitely not too late to change your behaviour.
Yeah. Do you think it's too late for people who are older than our kind of generation or whatever to change, or is it just harder?
I don't think it's ever too late, she says optimistically. It's definitely harder. There's especially I find in the media today like a very big cancel culture.
Go on.
And I've seen people talk about how basically if you post or say or do one thing which isn't quite right or which is considered wrong, instead of being kind of, maybe encouraged to change your mind or change your attitudes, that person, often a public figure or a celebrity, is completely cancelled. And that, I think, is the least helpful kind of trope in social media today, because it means that you can't grow, and also you're scared to put yourself out there.
Yeah. So do you think social media is more effective for news or for activism, or for both? Because obviously you kind of got two different things going on, if you get what I mean.
I mean, obviously, it works very differently as a news platform versus as an activism platform. I mean, normally what you'd look for in a news platform is like clear information, and that is the opposite of what social media has. You kind of have to pin together the trail of what on earth is going on. So I think it's probably better for raising awareness and being that sort of activism platform than purely a news one.
Yeah. I guess you could make some arguments, though, with stuff to do with news in that, for example, I know this is a lot with American things, but to a certain extent in the UK as well, a lot of protests, a lot of the interactions, a lot of the abuses of power, particularly in the US, but also in the UK, kind of only become to light because of social media. So do you think there's kind of still a value in that as a type of news, even if it's not got some big media companies' banner in front of it?
Yeah, I think working on an international platform, it's probably the best way to go, actually, if you want a news story to catch the attention of millions. And I talk about in the article how teenagers are as attached to Instagram as they are distant from the major networks of news. And I don't think, I mean, you're supposed to be 13 on Instagram, but we all know that sometimes it's bent. And I can't think of another way that a 12 or 13-year-old would have found out so much about the Black Lives Matter protests or about George Floyd. And I don't think that this whole situation would have skyrocketed actually as much as it has if it weren't for that Blackout Tuesday challenge.
In terms of what you're talking about there, in terms of social media being used to kind of force these issues to the forefront, how much do you think these social media campaigns have expanded the awareness of the issues the Black Lives Matter movement is discussing? Like, even outside of maybe your immediate family, do you feel like people have a broader understanding of these issues on a deeper level?
I do get the impression that around me, the world has kind of taken notice of this. And I do, again, think that is actually largely due to the social media presence that the Black Lives Matter campaign has had recently. If you think about if you look on Sky, they've now got either an anti-racist or a Black Lives Matter kind of section. That certainly didn't exist before. Football's restarted, they've all got Black Lives Matter on the back of their top. And it's things like that. I mean, obviously, this is also, we can't forget, kind of a money-making scheme, and that these organisations want to align themselves kind of the popular cause. But it also shows me that this is wider than, the little bubble that I'm living in, and it's wider than even England or America. It's definitely stretched beyond, and you can see that there's been protests across the world. I think in over 60 countries have had protests about something that actually wasn't even triggered by something in their own society. And I think that's a really fantastic way that now everything is a lot more globalised. It's not just a national issue, it becomes an international issue as well.
So I think there's been a lot of discussion about the ways in which this knowledge might not necessarily be deep. Like, a lot of people know how to use the words systemic racism, institutional racism, at least know more or less what they mean. But do you think people are going and doing that further reading and getting that deeper knowledge? Or is it kind of sticking to surface level stuff and like money making stuff like you were talking about just now?
Yeah, I do think there is a proportion of the population which now maybe use the words without using their meaning, which I have to say in itself is still a step in the right direction. And it's good to be ambitious when we're thinking about kind of ironing out the flaws in our society, but it's also good to actually remember that every small step counts. But I do also think that there are, perhaps not as large, but also a relatively large percentage who have been reading up, looking into the issues more, and actually trying to get a grasp on everything they've kind of missed, I guess, over the last few years because it hasn't come to their attention. I was almost thinking if, do you remember the 555 challenge on Instagram at the beginning of lockdown, where you run 5 miles, donate £5 to the NHS, and then nominate another 5 people? And I was almost thinking if that sort of ethos was applied to the awareness campaign that was run on Instagram for Black Lives Matter, you would actually end up with a much more effective use of the platform. Because if you were doing something like, signing a petition or donating, then you would be turning, awareness into action. And I think that's what maybe this Blackout Tuesday campaign missed, which it really could have benefited from.
I think I've seen some of that in a sense, because have you seen on social media some people for example, donating to a bail fund and then getting other people to match them? Like I
Mm,
saw there was a whole thing. I think this actor Griffin Newman started it, where basically a lot of actors and writers and stuff who'd been involved in like police shows and police films, that kind of thing, would basically be like, "Hey, I made X amount of money for playing a police officer. I'm going to donate this amount to a bail fund and stuff like that." And a lot of them did that. So I think I don't. I mean, the Blackout Tuesday isn't obviously didn't necessarily do this in all sectors, but I think definitely what you were talking about in terms of that I'm doing this, so you in my group should do it too, is kind of being reflected a bit with donations here.
yeah. And then I suppose it's almost a question of, not does it matter if people know the deeper story, it's always important to be properly educated, but at least
Yeah,
even if these people are remaining ignorant, they're still doing some good and they're still actually helping the people who really need it.
yeah. I guess it's like if you want to be optimistic about it, at least it's harm reduction. Like it's better for someone to have a very surface level knowledge and have donated money than for someone to be completely ignorant and not have donated money. Like it's even if it's not perfect, it's better than nothing, I guess.
I think the problem with kind of activism campaigns is you can never do enough in a weird way. You can never
Yeah,
achieve, all of your goals, and these things take years and years and years. And if you think about the progress that's even been made towards anti-racism over the last 100 years, however much further we've got to go, it's still been magnificent. So I do think it's important to, yeah, I think actually you need to be a little bit optimistic in these situations. Still strive for, not complacent optimism. I think you've got to be optimistic and still look at what you need to do more. But I think a little bit of optimism isn't the worst thing in the world.
yeah. So you think that even though these campaigns aren't always great, they can be they can essentially improve things even in small terms, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, there are loads of criticisms for these sort of campaigns, and many of them I fully agree with, but I still think you shouldn't be shutting them down. You should be trying to develop them. And they have had an impact, on our lives as well. I know that my old school had an anti-racism petition. They've now got a conference with different speakers coming in. So it's not
Yeah.
just almost, it's education, which will lead hopefully to more education. It's a process, and hopefully it will snowball. I think one of the things we've got to do is keep the campaign alive, keep it in the forefront of people's minds. And even with coronavirus going on, remember that there are other issues which we can't forget about simply because of the pandemic. And often actually they go hand in hand. I actually wrote another article about how Black and minority communities within the UK are far more likely actually to die from COVID-19. Again, part of that is because of systemic racism. So we can't kind of isolate these issues necessarily. We've
Yeah.
got to think about them all together and use every opportunity to kind of encourage further education and to help us further deal with the problems.
hmm Coming back to the news element, do you think social media companies should be doing more to kind of make sure the information on their platforms is accurate?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And it's been a big complaint for a long while about, especially in the post-truth era. But
hmm
even Trump, I can't remember what site it was on now, but he actually got one of his posts taken down because the social media company said this is not accurate. I think it's important that they keep fact checking, but you've got to remember that it's very difficult for them to kind of get through everything, and often truth and even statistics can be subjective. So it's, even though I think it's something they should definitely strive for, I can see why it's very difficult for them.
Yeah, because I guess it's hard to differentiate between what is misleading, what is an outright lie, what
Mm.
is reframing of statistics to make a certain point. And like even me as a person who writes, I know sometimes I use not to be misleading necessarily, but I use statistics in a way to make a point, and that isn't necessarily lying. Like
Yeah.
it's, I think it's a very difficult job for them to do.
Well, just on top of that, you've got to allow people to speak their minds, freedom of speech. So a lot of conflicting issues which need dealing with at the same time.
Definitely. So, what do you think are maybe the dangers of using media as a news source? So, obviously, we've talked about factual, whether it's factual or not. Is there anything else that you think is a potential issue or danger in terms of using social media as a news source?
Yeah. I think my particular worry is that it turns into a trend and you take away from the severity of the issue, because it becomes almost a pervertly light-hearted thing to post, for example, for posting a black square, and you have to do it to fit in, as opposed to because you actually agree with the meaning and the message. So I think that would be my main concern.
Yeah, but social pressure is still effective, right? Like, at the end of the day, it still gets people doing something, right? Or is it maybe a problem?
I think it can be problematic, because if you're doing something because of peer pressure, you might even come to resent the thing in the first place. And actually then it might be the opposite if you were to post something in support of Black Lives Matter, but you were only doing it because your friends did it as well. I actually wonder whether that's going in the opposite direction.
Yeah. What do you think is the future of the relationship between news and social media?
I think it's definitely going to continue to grow, if I had to guess. And especially the way that politics has now entered the social media sphere. So I'm not so sure that one's a good thing, because I don't know, if there's something old-fashioned in me which definitely says it needs to be done in the proper way.
Yeah.
I think it is going to continue to grow, though. I think these social media platforms are going to continue to morph into news sites. And as long as we keep kind of tabs on that, they keep fact-checking, then I think that can be a good thing, and it can help bring news into the teenagers' sphere a little bit more.
Yeah. We're going to the conclusion that it's kind of, there's problems within it, but it's still ultimately a net good.
Yeah, I think so. I think it needs developing, because this is maybe even the first time that such a large awareness campaign has taken place online. On a social media platform. I think it's got a long way to go, but we should be trying to use it as opposed to shut it down.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for joining me today, Alex. Is there anywhere you would like people to find you online if they want to talk to you about this stuff or anything else, or see what you're sharing on social media?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to have a look on the Voice website, and then you can comment on my different articles, or you can find me on Instagram at alex.dhart.
Nice. And the article will be linked in the show notes, and relevant stuff like that will be. You can find everything that's posted on Voice on the website, voicemag.uk. You can find the official Voice Instagram and Twitter at voicemaguk. And you can find at voice.extra, where all the contributors will put random stuff like what we've been watching, if someone's like cooked something or whatever, just kind of fun stuff about what we're doing in our lives. Please don't forget to like, to comment, rate. It really helps us get the word out, especially if you like the podcast. Please just tell your friends, tell anyone, even your enemies. Tell your enemies you like this podcast, why not? So thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next week with another podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye. Thanks to Kevin MacLeod for letting us use Shaving Mirror. You can find his stuff on incompetech.com.